What we're looking at here is the original 1939 Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, it contains a message that's incredibly raw, powerful, and, well, according to some, a message that's been lost to time. We're going to explore that original message and dig into the argument that something absolutely essential has changed since then. So, let's dive in.
Okay, let's just start with a really provocative question. What if the original cure for alcoholism wasn't about willpower, it wasn't about therapy, but about a miracle? I know, it sounds pretty extreme, but that's the claim right at the heart of this book, and that's exactly what we're going to investigate.
All right, so first things first, we've got to get our heads around how the book actually defined the problem. Because back in 1939, this wasn't seen as a lack of willpower or some kind of moral failing. No, the book presents alcoholism as a truly, utterly hopeless dilemma.
And the book uses this really specific and honestly kind of surprising word, an allergy. And they meant it literally, not as some kind of metaphor. The idea was that for certain people, alcohol triggered this uncontrollable physical craving that just completely bulldozed their mental control.
And this, right here, is the crucial takeaway. If the problem is a physical allergy plus a mental obsession, then willpower is completely, totally useless. The person is powerless. As the book says, self-reliance? Yeah, that one thing you think you can count on? The book says it's guaranteed to fail.
And look, this wasn't just a physical thing, right? It was deeply spiritual. This quote just brilliantly illustrates the absolute despair. The Four Horsemen weren't just some dramatic flair, they were the daily reality for the person trapped in this cycle. The book paints this picture of total and complete defeat.
So, if the problem is something human power just can't touch, then the solution has to come from somewhere outside of human power. And that is exactly where the book takes us next.
So all that typical advice? Just try harder, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The book basically just throws all of that right out the window. It states point blank, the answer was not going to be found by digging deeper within yourself. No, the answer was the exact opposite. It was this radical, really counterintuitive idea, the complete surrender of yourself to a power greater than you. A full-on admission of total defeat? Well, that was the very first step toward victory.
And we're not talking about just feeling a little bit better here. The book presents the solution as this profound, life-altering event, a vital spiritual experience. They literally described it as a miracle, the actual intervention of a higher power that fundamentally changed them and did for them what they could never, ever do for themselves.
But here's the thing. This spiritual experience wasn't something you just, sat around and hoped for. The book lays out a very specific, very practical program that was designed to produce it. This wasn't about wishful thinking. This was a program of action.
The book actually promises a roadmap. These clear-cut directions became what we all now famously know as the 12 steps. They were presented as the specific instructions for how to find this power and have that spiritual experience.
And you can really see the arc of the whole program right here. It moves from surrender in step 3 to this fearless self-inventory in step 4 to going out and making things right with other people in step 9. But just look at the promise of step 12. The result of taking these actions is that spiritual experience. It's cause and effect.
And this is a brilliant example of just how practical this all was. This isn't some abstract philosophical exercise. This is a resentment inventory pulled directly from the book. You write down who you're angry at, exactly why, and what part of your own self-centeredness, your self-esteem, your security, was threatened. It was a fact-finding and a fact-facing process designed to dismantle the ego, piece by piece.
Okay, so you've got the problem, you've got the solution, and you've got the program of action. But how do you prove it actually works? That's where the next part comes in. And it's an absolutely crucial element of the original book, The Power of Personal Stories.
Well, the co-founders claimed a success rate that was just staggering for the time, 75%. Now, to be clear, that was specifically for those they felt had really tried the program. But for a condition that everyone considered hopeless, that number was absolutely remarkable.
And this wasn't some afterthought, let's just throw some stories in at the end. No, the inclusion of personal stories was a deliberate strategy. They knew they needed to provide, in their own words, living proof. These testimonies, they were the data, the evidence that this radical spiritual solution wasn't just a cool theory, but a reality for dozens of people who seemed like they were total lost causes.
Just look at these titles from the first edition stories. They're not dry case studies, they're human dramas. The Doctor's Nightmare, Riding the Rods, the car smasher. They tell you right away that these were real people from all walks of life who shared a common deadly peril and had found a common solution.
And this is where we get to the central claim, the real heart of this entire explainer, that this intense, spiritually focused message, the one that produced that incredible 75% success rate, was fundamentally changed over time.
The argument is stated just incredibly bluntly, that original path, the one aimed squarely at a powerful, transformative spiritual experience, was altered, and in that process, diluted.
And right here, this is the smoking gun, so to speak. In the very first edition, the goal of the steps was a vital spiritual experience. But in later editions, you see that language gets softened to spiritual awakening. Then an appendix was even added that suggested, hey, maybe all that's really needed is a personality change. The focus seems to shift from a sudden miraculous event to a more gradual psychological process.
So the critique, in a nutshell, is this. The bar had been lowered. The whole argument is that by changing that language, the original high-stakes challenge seeking a life-altering encounter with a higher power was replaced by a much more manageable goal of simple self-improvement.
And that leaves us with this final, really thought-provoking question. Look, the changes undeniably made the program more palatable, more accessible to a wider audience. But in doing so, in lowering that bar from a vital spiritual experience all the way down to a personality change, was the miraculous power at the very heart of the original 1939 message lost in translation? That's the question the first edition leaves us with.